The werewolf had never bowed to anyone, not to the elders, not to the council, not even to the Alpha King who had bonded with it since birth. They said I was nothing, wolfless, a servant with scarred hands and a borrowed name. His brother promised me a place beside him. Promised I would finally belong. He lied. But here is what no one tells you about ancient beasts. They do not see status. They do not see bloodlines or fine clothes or noble titles. They see souls. And when Vornath, the most fearsome werewolf in 1,000 years, walked past every noble-born female and lowered his great head before me, the entire pack forgot how to breathe. The crack of wood against bone echoed through the training yard before the morning mist had lifted from the hills of Ironvale. Aelith rolled left, barely avoiding the staff that would have shattered her collarbone. She came up fast, dirt coating the worn fabric of her sleeves, and swept her opponent's legs before he could reset his stance. The guard, a thick-necked male twice her size, crashed onto his back with a grunt of shock. She pressed the end of her staff to his throat. Yield. He stared up at her, disbelief curdling into something uglier. A servant girl, a wolfless nobody, and she had put him in the dirt for the second time this week. Yield, she repeated, quieter this time. He slapped the ground. Aelith stepped back, offering no hand to help him rise. She had learned long ago that such gestures were never returned. Impressive. A female voice slithered through the silence. For a stray. Aelith did not need to turn. She knew that voice the way she knew the scars on her own palms, intimately, painfully, by memory burned into skin. Lady Vessa descended the stone steps of the viewing platform, her silk gown pristine, her smile a perfectly crafted knife. Behind her, a cluster of noble-born daughters giggled like carrion birds circling a wounded animal. 23 years old, Vessa continued, stopping just outside striking distance. She was cruel, not stupid. And still no wolf. Tell me, Aelith, does it hurt? Knowing that even the lowest Omega has something you never will? The guard scrambled to his feet and retreated, eager to escape the coming blood sport. Aelith kept her grip loose on the staff, her breathing even. She had been a target since the day Lord Heron dragged her through Thornhold's gates as a child, a war orphan with no name, no people, and no worth beyond what labor she could provide. Every reaction fed them. Every flinch was a feast. My wolf, Aelith said, sliding the staff into the rack with deliberate calm, does not determine what I can do with these. She raised her scarred hands. As that guard just learned. Again. Vessa's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Hey, hands, she said sweetly, do not warm beds at night, and they certainly will not make Lord Corvin see you as anything more than a distraction. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Somewhere behind the walls Aelith had spent years building. Something cracked. But she did not let it show. Never let it show. Excuse me. She turned toward the armory, keeping her stride steady. Some of us serve this pack through skill, not just bloodlines. She felt Vessa's glare burn into her back but did not look behind her. She had survived worse. Would survive this. The corridors of Thornhold were cold at this hour, empty save for servants who avoided her eyes and guards who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Aelith walked in silence, her footsteps echoing against stone that had stood for centuries, trying to forget Vessa's words. Distraction. Is that what she was to Corvin after everything? A prickling sensation crawled up her spine, the feeling of being watched. Aelith stopped, turned. The eastern tower loomed above the courtyard, and there, silhouetted against the pale morning sky, stood a solitary figure, Alpha King Valdric. Even from this distance she could feel the weight of his gaze, not casual, not dismissive, focused. It was not the first time. She had noticed him before, at training, in the halls, during ceremonies. Always watching, never approaching. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked away first and walked faster. Why is he always watching me? She did not have an answer. But somewhere in the shadows of Thornhold, a beast with eyes like molten silver lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring, as if it too had caught the scent of something long awaited. Aelith remembered the first day she saw Corvin. She was 11 years old, still flinching at loud noises, still waking in the night gasping for air that smelled of smoke and blood. Lord Heron had put her to work in the stables, mucking stalls and hauling feed, her small body aching from labor it was never built to bear. Corvin had ridden in that morning on a stallion too large for his 12 years, laughing at something one of his companions had said. His chestnut hair caught the sunlight. His grin was effortless, the smile of a boy who had never known hunger or fear or the sound of his mother screaming. He had spotted her. This dirty, hollow-eyed girl struggling with a bucket half her weight, and stopped. "That looks heavy," he had said, swinging down from his horse. Aelith had frozen, certain she was about to be struck for being in his path. Instead, Corvin took the bucket from her hands and carried it himself to the trough, spilling half of it on his fine boots in the process. He had laughed at his own clumsiness. "I am not very good at this." And despite everything, despite the grief still raw and bleeding inside her, Aelith had almost smiled. That was the beginning. Over the years, Corvin sought her out in ways that felt like secrets. A stolen apple pressed into her hand during a feast. A warm cloak left outside her quarters on the coldest night of winter. Conversations in the stables when no one was watching, where he spoke to her like she was real, like she mattered. "You are different from everyone else," he told her once, when she was 17 and foolish enough to believe words could be promises. "You see things clearly. You do not pretend." She had held those words close, built a fortress around them, and convinced herself they meant something more. But Corvin was also the second son of a dead alpha, brother to a king who had inherited a fractured pack and endless wars. He had duties, expectations, and he had other women. Aelith heard the whispers, saw him escorting noble daughters through the gardens, dancing with them at celebrations, disappearing for days and returning with stories she trained herself not to hear. He always came back to her. That was what she told herself. He always came back. Yet he never declared anything, never promised anything that could be held against him in the light of day. Just glances that lingered too long, touches that felt too intentional. Words spoken only when they were alone, vanishing like mist the moment others appeared. Crumbs. She had gathered them with both hands for 12 years, starving, convincing herself they would one day become a meal. Now, at 23, Aelith paused at the window overlooking the training grounds and caught her own reflection in the glass. Scarred hands, plain face, servant's clothes worn thin at the elbows. What does he actually see when he looks at me? She did not know. But tonight was the bonding moon feast, and Corvin had whispered something to her that morning that made her heart forget how to beat. "Stay close to me tonight. Everything is about to change." Aelith wanted to believe him. She was terrified that she still did. And high above the castle, in chambers she would never be permitted to enter, Alpha King Valdric stood at his window, watching the same training grounds, his jaw tight with a tension no one else ever saw. Beside him, Vornath stirred. The great wolf's ears pricked forward, a low sound rumbling in its chest, not a growl, but something closer to recognition. Valdric looked down at his bonded beast. "What do you sense?" Vornath did not answer, but his silver eyes were fixed on a single figure moving through the courtyard below. The ragged girl with scarred hands. The great hall blazed with firelight and false warmth. Aelith stood near the back, half hidden behind a pillar, watching the nobility of Ironvale spin and glitter like jeweled insects. Her dress was borrowed, a cast-off from one of the kitchen mistresses, altered to fit her frame, and she felt every thread of its inadequacy against the silks and velvets surrounding her. "Stay close to me tonight." Corvin's words echoed in her mind as her eyes searched the crowd for him. She found him near the center of the hall, accepting a goblet from a servant, his easy laugh cutting through the noise. He looked golden in the firelight, every inch the prince the pack adored. Then his eyes found hers across the room. He smiled. That smile. Aelith felt her pulse stutter despite every instinct screaming for caution. The bonding moon was sacred. Once a year, wolves declared their mates before the pack, sealing bonds that could not be broken. Aelith had watched the ceremony from the shadows for years, always knowing her place in that circle was impossible. How could anyone claim a woman without a wolf? Yet here was Corvin, weaving through the crowd toward her, that smile still fixed in place. "There you are." He reached her and leaned close, the scent of honeyed wine on his breath. "I was worried you would not come. You told me to stay close." "I did." His fingers brushed her wrist, light and deliberate. "And tonight, I intend to give you a reason to stay forever." Aelith's heart slammed against her ribs. "What do you mean?" Corvin glanced around, ensuring they were unobserved, then pulled her behind the pillar, deeper into shadow. "The bonding ceremony," he murmured. "I am going to claim you, Aelith, publicly, in front of the entire pack." The world tilted. "You... what?" "I have waited long enough." He cradled her face in his hands and his eyes, those warm amber eyes she had loved since childhood, held something she had never seen before. "I do not care that you have no wolf. I do not care what the council says. You are mine. You have always been mine." Aelith could not breathe, could not think. 12 years. 12 years of waiting, hoping, convincing herself she was foolish for wanting something she could never have. And now, "Corvin," her voice cracked. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I have ever been about anything." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent, and stepped back. "Wait for the ceremony. When my name is called, I will call yours. And after tonight, no one will ever look down on you again." He vanished into the crowd before she could respond, leaving her trembling against the cold stone. Aelith pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm the frantic beating beneath her ribs. He chose me. After everything, he finally chose me. She wanted to laugh, wanted to weep, wanted to find Vessa and watch the horror bloom across her perfect face when the announcement was made. But as the minutes passed and the crowd shifted, a different sensation crept through her chest. Unease. She scanned the hall, searching for the source, and found it on the raised dais at the far end. Alpha King Valdric sat on the throne of Ironvale, carved from blackwood and bone, his dark hair swept back from a face that could have been hewn from granite. He wore black, as he always did, as if color were a weakness he refused to indulge. He was not watching the dancers. He was not watching his brother. He was watching her. Aelith felt the air leave her lungs. There was something in that gaze. Something heavy and searching and far too intense for the distance between them. As if he could see through the pillar, through her borrowed dress, through every wall she had ever built, straight into the trembling thing at the center of her chest. For one suspended moment, the noise of the hall faded to nothing. It was just her and the king and a question she could not hear but somehow felt. Then a servant brushed past, breaking the spell, and Valdric looked away. Aelith exhaled shakily. What was that? She did not have time to wonder. A gong sounded deep and resonant, silencing the crowd. The bonding ceremony was beginning. Aelith moved closer to the edge of the hall, heart pounding, as the elder took his place before the sacred circle etched into the stone floor. One by one, wolves stepped forward to claim their mates. Names were spoken. Hands were joined, bonds were sealed. And then, Lord Corvin, second son of the late Alpha King Aldrich, stepped forward. Aelith's breath caught. This was it. Corvin walked to the center of the circle, confident, golden, every eye in the hall upon him. The elder raised his hands. Have you come to declare your mate before the pack and the ancestors who watch? Corvin hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. But Aelith saw it, felt it like a blade sliding between her ribs. No. His eyes flickered toward the left side of the hall, toward a cluster of noble women in fine gowns, and something cold flooded Aelith's veins. I have, Corvin said. Aelith took a step forward. This night, Corvin continued, I declare my intent to bond with... Say my name. Please, say my name. Lady Lysara of the Eastern Reach. The silence that followed was absolute. Aelith stopped. Her body simply stopped, as if the words had severed every string that held her upright. Lysara. From across the hall, a woman with hair like autumn fire stepped forward, her smile a knife wrapped in silk. She took Corvin's outstretched hand, and the crowd erupted in applause. Aelith could not move, could not breathe. He promised me. He promised. She saw Corvin's gaze sweep the crowd, find her frozen form in the shadows, and look away. He looked away. And a part of Aelith she had guarded for 12 years finally shattered. The applause had barely faded when Aelith felt the walls closing in. She turned, pushing through the crowd, desperate for air, for darkness, for anywhere that was not this hall filled with witnesses to her destruction. Her vision blurred, her chest burned. She could hear the whispers already spreading like venom through the guests. Did you see her face? She actually believed he would choose her. A wolfless servant. The audacity. Aelith burst through the side doors and into the cold corridor beyond. She pressed her back against the stone wall, gasping, fighting the tears that threatened to betray her. Do not cry. Do not give them that. Oh dear. A voice, sweet as poisoned honey, echoed from the shadows. Did someone get lost? Aelith's blood turned to ice. Lady Lysara emerged from the doorway, her autumn hair gleaming, her emerald gown catching the torchlight like dragon scales. She moved with the practiced grace of a predator who had already won and simply wanted to admire the kill. You must be the little servant girl Corvin mentioned. Lysara stopped an arm's length away, her ice-blue eyes conducting a slow, deliberate inventory of Aelith's borrowed dress, her work-roughened hands, and her tear-bright eyes. How precious. He said you were... persistent. Aelith could not speak. Her throat had sealed shut. I want you to understand something. Lysara leaned closer, her perfume cloying, suffocating. I did not steal him from you. You cannot steal what was never yours to begin with. Corvin plays with broken things when he is bored. It is a weakness of his. But when it matters, when the pack is watching, he chooses properly. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Aelith's face with mock tenderness. He chose me. Aelith flinched away from the touch. Lysara smiled. Run along now, little stray, back to the kitchens where you belong. And do try to stay out of my way. I would hate for your remaining time at Thornhold to become unpleasant. She turned and glided back toward the hall, pausing at the threshold. Oh, and one more thing. Lysara glanced over her shoulder, her smile sharpening. The Alpha King has been watching you, I noticed. Everyone noticed. Her eyes glittered with malice. If I were you, I would be very careful about that. Valdric destroys things that threaten his pack. And right now, you look very much like a threat. She vanished through the doors. Aelith stood alone in the corridor, her body trembling, Lysara's words coiling around her chest like serpents. Valdric destroys things that threaten his pack. Why would the Alpha King see her as a threat? And why, despite everything, did some part of her want to run toward that danger instead of away from it? The days following the bonding feast were a masterwork of quiet cruelty. Lysara did not attack openly. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she waged war through whispers, a comment here, a suggestion there, each one calculated to tighten the noose around Aelith's neck without leaving visible marks. The kitchen mistress who had lent Aelith the dress demanded it back, claiming it had been stained. It had not. The stable master reassigned her duties to the far pastures, a 2-hour walk each morning through mud and frost. The servants who had once ignored her with neutral indifference now crossed to the other side of corridors when she approached, as if her misfortune were contagious. And Corvin. Corvin was everywhere, yet nowhere she could reach. Aelith saw him walking with Lysara through the gardens, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something he said. She saw them dining together at the high table, heads bent close, voices low. She saw him glance at her once, just once, across the training yard, and the guilt in his eyes was so brief, she might have imagined it. He did not come to explain, did not send word, did not offer even the smallest acknowledgement that 12 years of whispered promises had meant anything at all. She had become invisible. No, worse than invisible. She had become a cautionary tale. Do not reach above your station. Do not forget what you are. Training became brutal. The other soldiers, emboldened by her fall from whatever grace she had briefly occupied, found reasons to make her suffer. Strikes that landed too hard. Sparring matches that turned vicious. Equipment that went missing or broke at suspicious moments. On the 5th morning, a guard named Brennick, thick-bodied, cruel-eyed, caught her in the yard before the others arrived. The Lord's little pet. He circled her slowly, a staff spinning lazily in his grip. Not so special now, are you? Aelith raised her own staff, ignoring the bruises that screamed beneath her sleeves. I never claimed to be special. No? Brennick lunged without warning, faster than his bulk suggested. Aelith blocked, but the force rattled her bones. He pressed forward, driving her back, each strike harder than the last. This was not training. This was punishment. Maybe, Brennick grunted, swinging for her ribs, if you spent less time chasing lords and more time knowing your place. Aelith ducked the strike, pivoted, and drove the end of her staff into the back of his knee. Brennick buckled with a shout of surprise. Before he could recover, she hooked his ankle, dropped him to the dirt, and pressed her staff across his throat. My place, she said, breathless but steady, is wherever I earn it. The yard had gone silent. She looked up and found a dozen faces staring, some shocked, some resentful, a few with something approaching respect. And beyond them, standing at the entrance to the armory, was Alpha King Valdric. He did not speak, did not move, simply watched her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Aelith released Brennick and stepped back. When she looked toward the armory again, Valdric was gone. But that night, she found a bundle outside her quarters. Inside was a new staff, perfectly balanced, wrapped in leather so supple it molded to her grip like a second skin. There was no note, no name, no explanation. But Aelith knew. She did not understand why, could not fathom what the Alpha King wanted from her, why he watched, why he gave gifts to a wolfless servant when his brother's betrothed was already spreading rumors about her. Be very careful, Lysara had warned. Valdric destroys things that threaten his pack. Aelith ran her fingers along the staff's smooth grain. If the king wanted to destroy her, he had strange ways of showing it. And somewhere deep in Thornhold, in chambers sealed by ancient magic, Vornath paced his enclosure with growing restlessness. The great wolf had not eaten in 3 days, had not slept, had done nothing but stare toward the eastern wing of the castle, where a ragged girl with calloused fingers lay awake, clutching a gift she did not understand. The beast's silver eyes gleamed in the darkness. Soon something ancient whispered through the bond. Soon. The presentation of mates was a tradition older than Thornhold itself. 3 weeks after the bonding ceremony, claimed pairs were formally introduced to the pack, a public blessing that cemented alliances and secured bloodlines for generations to come. It was pageantry wrapped in ritual, and the entire nobility of Ironvale gathered in the Great Hall to witness it. Aelith had no reason to be there, but Lysara had made certain she received an invitation, delivered by a smirking servant with instructions that attendance was expected of all household staff. So Aelith stood at the back of the hall, dressed in her worn servant's clothes, watching the wolves of Ironvale parade their chosen mates before the Alpha King's throne. Valdric sat above them all, his expression unreadable, Vornath nowhere to be seen. The great wolf rarely appeared at public functions. Some said he was too wild. Others whispered that he simply did not care for the politics of lesser wolves. Aelith wished she could share that indifference. Lord Corvin and Lady Lysara of the Eastern Reach. The announcement cut through the hall, and Aelith felt every muscle in her body tense. They emerged together, Corvin golden and smiling, Lysara radiant in white and silver, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They walked toward the sacred circle where the elder waited, and the crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow. "Look away," Aelith told herself. "You do not need to watch this." But she could not move, could not turn, could only stand there as Corvin and Lysara knelt before the elder and received the blessing that should have been hers. "Do you accept this bond before the pack and the ancestors?" "I do," Corvin said. "I do," Lysara echoed. "Then rise as one. May your union bring strength to Ironvale." The hall erupted in applause. Aelith felt something crack inside her chest, the last fragile remnant of hope she had not realized she was still holding. And then, Lysara looked directly at her. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. Lysara's smile widened, sharp and triumphant, and she leaned up to whisper something in Corvin's ear. He turned, found Aelith in the crowd. For one terrible moment she thought he might look away again, pretend she did not exist, let her fade into the background where she belonged. Instead, he spoke. "Actually," his voice carried across the sudden silence, "there is something I should address." The elder frowned. "My lord?" Corvin turned to face the crowd, his expression arranged into something that almost resembled regret. "Some of you may have heard rumors about a misunderstanding before the bonding feast, about promises I allegedly made to a servant of this household." "No." Aelith's blood turned to ice. "I want to be clear." Corvin's eyes found hers again, and there was nothing in them. No guilt, no shame, just the flat calculation of a man protecting his reputation. "I made no such promises. If anyone interpreted kindness as something more, that is unfortunate. But the fault lies with those who reach beyond their station, not with those who simply showed them basic decency." The whispers erupted like wildfire. She made it up. Delusional. A servant thinking she could claim a lord's son. Aelith stood frozen, exposed, every face in the hall turning toward her with mockery or pity or disgust. The humiliation of the bonding feast had been private, confined to those who had witnessed her reaction. This was annihilation. Corvin had rewritten history, made her the villain, the desperate, pathetic servant girl who had invented a fantasy and embarrassed herself. And she could not defend herself, could not speak, could not do anything but stand there as 12 years of her life were erased in a single breath. The tears came despite everything. She felt them slip down her cheeks, hot and damning, proof of her weakness for everyone to see. "Run," her mind screamed. Get out now." She turned toward the doors, and that was when the ground began to shake. A sound tore through the hall, a howl so deep, so primal, that it seemed to vibrate in Aelith's very bones. The torches flickered, The windows rattled, and from the shadows behind the Alpha King's throne, something massive emerged. Vornath. The werewolf of Iron Vale stood 12 feet at the shoulder, his fur the color of midnight and starlight, his eyes burning silver like twin moons. He was legend made flesh, a beast bonded to the royal bloodline for 1,000 years, a creature of such power that entire armies had fled at the sight of him. He had never appeared at a public ceremony, never deigned to acknowledge anyone beyond his bonded king. Until now. The wolf walked forward. The crowd scrambled apart, nobles tripping over each other to escape his path. But Vornath did not look at them, did not spare a glance for Corvin or Lysara or the terrified elder. His silver gaze was fixed on one person, the ragged girl with tears on her cheeks and scars on her hands. Aelith could not move, could not breathe, could only watch as the most fearsome creature in the kingdom crossed the hall toward her, with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped an arm's length away. And then Vornath, the werewolf who had never bowed to anyone, lowered his great head to the ground at her feet. The entire pack forgot how to breathe. The silence stretched like a held breath. Aelith stared down at the massive wolf prostrated before her, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Vornath's fur rippled like living shadow, his great sides heaving with each breath, his silver eyes closed in what could only be described as reverence. This is not happening. This cannot be happening. Behind her, the crowd remained frozen. She could feel their shock radiating outward like heat from a forge. Nobles, who had laughed at her moments ago, now stood slack-jawed, their carefully constructed hierarchies crumbling before a truth none of them could explain. Impossible. Elder Harwick's voice cracked through the silence, thin and reedy with disbelief. The werewolf has never, in 1,000 years, he has never. Movement on the dais. Aelith lifted her gaze and found Valdric descending the steps of his throne. The Alpha King moved with the controlled power of a predator, each stride deliberate, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run and stay in equal measure. The crowd parted before him as they had for Vornath, but this was different. This was not fear. This was awe. Valdric stopped at the edge of the sacred circle, looking first at his bonded wolf, then at the trembling woman the beast had chosen to honor. Vornath. His voice was low, meant only for the wolf. What do you see? The great beast raised his head. A sound rumbled from his chest. Not a growl, but something older, something that resonated in a language beyond words. Valdric's expression shifted. Surprise. Recognition. And beneath it all, something that looked almost like relief. He turned to face the hall. My brother. His voice carried to every corner, cold and absolute. You stand before this pack and call this woman a liar. You claim she invented promises you never made. Corvin had gone pale as bone. Lysara clutched his arm, her earlier triumph curdling into visible fear. Your Majesty, I only meant to clarify. You meant to protect yourself. Valdric cut him off without raising his voice. The effect was more devastating than any shout. You meant to sacrifice her dignity to preserve your reputation. I watched you do it. The king turned back to Aelith. She could not read his expression. It was locked behind walls she could not begin to scale. But something in his gaze made her heart stutter. My wolf has never bowed to anyone, Valdric said, quieter now. The words meant for her, alone. Not to my father. Not to me. In 1,000 years of bonding with our bloodline, he has acknowledged no one outside the royal house. He paused. Until you. Aelith shook her head, tears still wet on her cheeks. I do not understand. I am no one. I have no wolf. I am nothing. You are not nothing. Valdric extended his hand, palm up, fingers open, an offering, a choice. You have never been nothing. The hall erupted in whispers. What is he doing? He cannot possibly. She is wolfless. She is a servant. Valdric ignored them all. His eyes never left hers. The bonding circle is still open, he said. Claims can still be made. Another pause, weighted with meaning. I am making one now. Aelith felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. But You have spent 23 years being told what you are not. Valdric's voice softened, just barely. Just enough for her to hear the fracture beneath the stone. Let me show you what you are. His hand remained extended. Waiting. Patient. Behind him, Vornath rose to his full height and fixed his silver gaze on Aelith with an expectation that felt ancient, inevitable. She thought of Corvin, of 12 years of crumbs that had never become a meal. She thought of Lysera's poison smile, of Vessa's casual cruelties, of every voice that had ever told her she was broken. And she thought of this man, this king, who had watched her from shadows for years and was now standing before the entire pack, offering her something no one had ever offered before. A choice. Aelith reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a warmth bloomed in her chest. Unexpected. Electric. Racing through her veins like liquid fire toward a place she had always believed was empty. Vornath threw back his head and howled. The sound shook the walls of Thornhold, shattered goblets, drove wolves to their knees. It was triumph and recognition and ancient magic waking from a sleep that had lasted generations. And through the bond he shared with his wolf, Valdric felt it too. His hand tightened around hers, his eyes widening with something that looked like wonder. What? Aelith gasped, her free hand pressing against her chest. What is happening to me? Valdric pulled her closer, shielding her from the chaos erupting around them. Later, he murmured against her hair. I will explain everything later, but right now, we need to get you out of here. He turned to the stunned crowd, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. This woman is under my protection. She is my claimed. Anyone who challenges that challenges me. His gaze found Corvin, who looked like he might be sick. And my wolf. No one spoke. No one dared. Valdric led Aelith out of the hall, Vornath padding behind them like a shadow made flesh, and the whispers that followed them were no longer mocking. They were afraid. The Queen's chambers had not been occupied in 15 years. Aelith stood in the center of the vast room, trying to reconcile her existence with the silk curtains, the crackling fireplace, the bed large enough to hold 6 people. Moonlight streamed through windows that overlooked the entire valley of Ironvale, and she could see the distant flicker of village lights like earthbound stars. These are yours now. Valdric stood near the door, maintaining a careful distance. Everything you need will be provided. Marta will attend you. She is trustworthy. Aelith turned to face him. In the softer light, away from the politics and pageantry, he looked different. Younger. More uncertain than the unshakable king who had just defied his entire pack for her. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why did you do this? Valdric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. 12 years ago, your parents died defending the northern border. They saved my father's life at the cost of their own. He moved to the window, his profile sharp against the moonlight. My father ordered you brought here under Lord Heron's care. He swore you would be protected. When he died, that oath passed to me. So this is duty? The word tasted bitter on her tongue. It began as duty. Valdric turned to face her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her breath catch. But duty does not explain why I watched you train every morning. Duty does not explain why I could not look away when you stood back up after every fall. Duty does not explain why seeing my brother break you in that hall made me want to tear out his throat. Aelith's heart hammered against her ribs. Then what does explain it? Valdric crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped just short of touching her. This close, she could see the storm in his gray eyes, the tension in his jaw. The restraint coiled through every line of his body. "I do not know," he admitted, "and that terrifies me more than any battle I have ever faced." Before she could respond, a knock shattered the moment. Valdric stepped back, his expression smoothing into stone. "Enter." The door opened to reveal a guard, his face pale with urgency. "Your Majesty, Lord Corvin demands an audience. He is insistent." Something dark flickered across Valdric's features. "Where?" "The war room. He refuses to leave." Valdric glanced at Aelith. "Stay here. Marta will bring food. Do not open the door for anyone else." He was gone before she could argue. The war room was carved from the bones of the mountain itself, its walls lined with maps and weapons and the weight of 1,000 strategic decisions. Corvin stood at the central table, his golden composure shattered, his hands braced against the wood as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Brother?" Valdric closed the door behind him. "You wish to speak." Corvin's head snapped up. "You humiliated me." "I claimed a woman you discarded. The humiliation was your own making." "She is a servant." Corvin's voice cracked with something between rage and desperation. "A wolfless nobody. You are the Alpha King. You cannot possibly—" "Cannot what?" Valdric's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Cannot see value where you saw only convenience? Cannot recognize strength where you saw only weakness? This is not about her." Corvin slammed his fist against the table. "This is about you. You have wanted her for years. Do not pretend otherwise." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Valdric did not deny it. "What I want," he said slowly, "is irrelevant. What matters is that you stood before our entire pack and called her a liar. You erased 12 years of her life to protect your pride. And you did it while Lysara watched with that vulture smile, knowing exactly what kind of man she had claimed." Corvin flinched. "I did not—" "You did." Valdric stepped closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "So let me be clear, brother. Aelith is mine now. My claimed, my responsibility. And if you or your betrothed do anything to harm her, I will forget that we share blood." "You would choose her over your own family?" "You chose your reputation over her heart. Do not speak to me of choices." Corvin stared at him, something breaking behind his eyes. "You truly care for her?" Valdric did not answer. He simply turned and walked toward the door. "Tell me one thing." Corvin's voice stopped him. "If you had not been king, if you had been free to pursue her from the beginning, would you have let me have her at all?" Valdric's hand rested on the door handle. For a long moment, he did not move. "No," he said quietly, "I would not have." He left his brother alone with the ruins of his choices. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Aelith adapted to her new reality in fragments, learning the rhythms of chambers that still felt borrowed, navigating corridors where servants now bowed instead of sneered, sitting at the high table where Lysara's hatred burned holes through her from across the room. But it was the moments with Valdric that reshaped her world. He came to her each evening after the council meetings ended, when the castle grew quiet and the weight of the crown seemed heaviest on his shoulders. They talked, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. Her childhood before the war, his burden of ruling too young, the dreams she had abandoned, the fears he had never spoken aloud. He never touched her, never pushed, never made her feel like she owed him anything for what he had done. And somehow, that restraint undid her more completely than any demand ever could. "You are staring again." Valdric's voice broke through her thoughts. They sat in the private garden behind the Queen's chambers, moonlight silvering the roses that climbed the ancient walls. He had brought wine. She had barely touched hers. I am trying to understand you, Aelith admitted. And? What have you concluded? That you are infuriating. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Most find me terrifying. Most do not see you sitting in rose gardens drinking wine, pretending you are not exhausted. The smile faded. You see too much. Perhaps. She set down her goblet and turned to face him fully. Or perhaps you have spent so long hiding that you have forgotten what it feels like to be seen. Valdric went very still. The air between them thickened with something neither had named. 3 weeks of careful distance. 3 weeks of conversations that circled closer and closer to a truth they both felt but feared to speak. Aelith. Her name was rough on his tongue. If I kiss you right now, I do not know if I will be able to stop. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then do not stop. He moved so fast she barely saw it. One hand cupping her face, the other pulling her against him, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger that stole every rational thought from her mind. This was not gentle. This was not careful. This was years of watching, wanting, waiting, finally unleashed. Aelith kissed him back with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching into his warmth. The world narrowed to the taste of him, the strength of his arms, the sound he made, low and desperate, when she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I should go, Valdric managed, though his hands had not released her. Before I do something we are both not ready for. Aelith wanted to argue, wanted to pull him back. But she saw the truth in his eyes, the fear of moving too fast, of becoming another person who took from her without giving her a choice. Tomorrow? She whispered. Tomorrow. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. And every day after, if you will have me. He left her in the garden, trembling, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously close to hope. And in the shadows of Thornhold, Vornath raised his head toward the moon and made a sound that was almost like laughter. The change began 3 nights later. Aelith woke gasping, her body burning with a heat that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep within her core. Sweat soaked her nightclothes. Her skin felt too tight, too sensitive. Every brush of fabric amplified 1,000-fold. What is happening to me? She stumbled to the window, desperate for cool air, and found the moon hanging full and heavy in the sky. Its light poured over her like liquid silver, and a presence she had never known existed. Something ancient, something that had been sleeping for 23 years, stirred in response. The door burst open. Valdric stood in the threshold, barefoot, his sleep clothes disheveled, his eyes wild with an emotion she could not name. I felt it. His voice was hoarse. Through Vornath, I felt you wake. Aelith gripped the windowsill, her knees threatening to buckle. Something is wrong. Something is... A wave of heat crashed through her, and she cried out. Valdric crossed the room in an instant, catching her before she could fall. His arms wrapped around her, strong and steady, anchoring her against the storm raging inside her body. Not wrong, he breathed against her hair. Aelith, this is not wrong. This is... He pulled back to look at her, and she saw wonder breaking through the concern in his eyes. Your wolf. She is waking up. That is impossible. Aelith shook her head, gasping through another surge of heat. I am wolfless. I have always been... You were never wolfless. Valdric cradled her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Some wolves need a catalyst to emerge, a trigger powerful enough to break through whatever was holding them back. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Vornath knew. The moment he saw you, he knew there was a power within you waiting to be freed. What kind of catalyst? Valdric hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. A bond. A true bond. The kind that forms between... He stopped, as if afraid to say the word. Between what? Aelith demanded, even as another wave of fire swept through her. Between mates. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning she was only beginning to understand. When I touched your hand at the ceremony, Valdric continued, I felt something. Vornath felt it too. A recognition. A calling. He swallowed hard. I did not want to believe it. Did not want to pressure you with something so overwhelming when you were still healing from what my brother did. But Aelith. A scream tore from her throat as the heat became unbearable. Her bones began to shift. Do not fight it. Valdric held her tighter, even as her body began to transform in his arms. Let her come. Let her out. Pain. Blinding, brilliant pain that felt like being unmade and remade simultaneously. Aelith felt her spine elongate, her muscles reshape, her senses explode into dimensions she had never known existed. And then, silence. She opened her eyes and found the world transformed. Colors were sharper, sounds were layered and complex, and the scent, God's, the scent of him, filled her entire being with a recognition so profound it nearly broke her. Mate. She looked down and saw paws where her hands should be, fur the color of moonlight, claws that gleamed like silver. I shifted. I finally shifted. Valdric knelt before her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Aelith, he breathed, you are magnificent. Her wolf moved on instinct, pressing her great head against his chest, breathing in his scent, claiming him in the most primal way she knew. And deep within the bond that now blazed between them, she felt Vornath's triumphant howl echo through every corner of her soul. Found you. The ancient voice rumbled. At last, the shift back came easier than expected. One moment she was wolf, the next she was woman. Naked and trembling on the floor, Valdric's cloak already wrapping around her shoulders before the cold could touch her skin. I have you. His voice was rough with emotion. I have you. Aelith looked up at him, this king who had watched her for years, who had defied his pack for her, who had waited with impossible patience while her soul slowly recognized what her mind had been too afraid to see. Mates, she whispered. We are truly mates. Yes. Valdric pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. I suspected. But I needed you to know it for yourself. Needed you to feel it without my influence. How long? She pulled back to look at him. How long have you known? Known? He shook his head. Only since Vornath bowed. But felt? Sensed that there was something between us that defied explanation? His jaw tightened. Years, Aelith. Years of watching you love my brother. Years of telling myself I had no right to want you. Years of... She kissed him. It was different now. Deeper. The bond between them hummed with every point of contact, amplifying sensation until she could not tell where she ended and he began. Valdric made a sound against her mouth, half groan, half prayer, and pulled her into his lap. Tell me to stop. His hands trembled against her back. Tell me and I will. Do not stop. She pressed closer, feeling his heart pound against her own. I have spent my whole life waiting for something I thought I would never have. Please, Valdric, do not make me wait anymore. He carried her to the bed. What followed was fire and tenderness, desperation and reverence. He touched her like she was sacred, loved her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. And when they finally lay tangled together, breathless and complete, Aelith felt tears slip down her temples. What is wrong? Valdric propped himself up, concern flooding his features. Did I hurt you? No. She laughed through the tears, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her own joy. No. You did not hurt me. I just never thought... Her voice broke. I never thought anyone would choose me, really choose me. Not out of convenience or boredom or duty. Just me. Valdric wiped her tears with his thumbs. I have been choosing you since the first moment I saw you stand back up after falling. I simply did not have the words for it then. And now? He lowered his forehead to hers, his voice dropping to a whisper. Now I have only 3 words. He kissed her softly. I love you. Aelith felt her heart shatter and reform into something stronger. I love you too, she breathed. I think I have for longer than I knew. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Ironvale, and somewhere in the depths of Thornhold, Vornath curled around himself and slept peacefully for the first time in months. His king had found his queen. The pack would know soon enough. The Great Hall had never been so crowded. Word had spread through Thornhold like wildfire. The wolfless servant had shifted. The Alpha Kings claimed had awakened a wolf so magnificent that even Vornath had acknowledged her as his equal. Now the entire nobility of Ironvale had gathered to witness the truth for themselves. Aelith stood at Valdric's side on the raised dais, wearing the black and silver of the royal house. Her hands no longer trembled, her chin no longer dipped. She had spent 23 years learning to survive. Now she would learn to reign. There have been questions. Valdric's voice silenced the murmuring crowd, about the woman I claimed, about her worthiness, about her place at my side. His eyes swept the hall, finding Lysara's barely concealed sneer, Corvin's hollow stare, and the elders who had whispered that he had gone mad. Today, those questions end. He turned to Aelith and extended his hand. She took it. Show them, he murmured. Show them who you are. Aelith closed her eyes and called to her wolf. The transformation was seamless now. No pain, no resistance. Just a flowing transition from woman to beast that drew gasps from every corner of the hall. She stood before them in her wolf form, her coat gleaming like moonlight on snow, her eyes burning gold where they had once been brown. She was larger than any she-wolf in living memory, her presence radiating a power that made even the strongest alphas lower their gazes. By the ancestors, Elder Harwick's voice shook. That is not possible. But Vornath was already moving. The great werewolf emerged from behind the throne and crossed the dais to stand beside Aelith. They were matched. Shadow and moonlight. 2 halves of something ancient and inevitable. And then, Vornath did something he had never done, not in 1,000 years of bonding with kings. He lowered himself beside her, not in submission, in partnership. The werewolf has chosen his equal. Valdric's voice rang through the stunned silence. The bond he recognizes is not political. It is not strategic. It is the bond of true mates, a bond our ancestors honored above all others. He turned to face the crowd directly. The first pack, the wolves who founded Ironvale 1,000 years ago, their bloodline was thought extinct. It was not. His gaze found Aelith. It was waiting, sleeping, hidden in a war orphan from the northern villages, where the old blood ran deepest. Everyone was too blind to see it. But Vornath knew. The werewolf carries the memory of that ancient line. He recognized what no one else could. The revelation crashed through the hall like a wave. Aelith shifted back, and Valdric immediately draped his cloak around her shoulders. She faced the crowd, faced every person who had ever mocked her, dismissed her, and told her she was broken. I was born with nothing, she said, her voice steady. Raised as nothing, treated as nothing, but I was never nothing. Her eyes found Corvin, who looked as if he might shatter. I was simply waiting for someone worthy enough to see me. She turned to Lysara, whose face had gone pale as death. You called me a stray, told me to know my place. Aelith smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. I know it now. One by one, the wolves of Ironvale began to kneel, the elders first, their ancient pride bending before a truth they could not deny. Then the nobles, the warriors, the servants who had once crossed corridors to avoid her. Lysara remained standing, her face contorted with fury. "This is absurd," she spat. "She is still a servant. She is still— Kneel." Vornath's voice, somehow audible, somehow resonating through the bond that connected all wolves, cut through her protest like a blade. "Or leave." Lysara's knees buckled. She knelt. Behind her, Corvin stared at Aelith with something that might have been grief, might have been regret, and might have been the dawning realization of everything he had thrown away. He knelt too. And then there was only Valdric, standing beside her, his hand finding hers. "My queen," he said softly, "my mate, my heart." Aelith looked out at the sea of bowed heads, at the pack that had once been her tormentors now kneeling at her feet. She thought of the girl she had been, scarred, starving for scraps of affection, convinced she would never be enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been forged by suffering, tempered by patience, and awakened by a love she had never dared to hope for. Valdric squeezed her hand. "How do you feel?" Aelith turned to him, her mate, her king, the man who had seen her when no one else could. "Complete," she said. "At last, I feel complete." Above them, through the great windows of Thornhold, the sun broke through the clouds and bathed the hall in golden light. And Vornath, the werewolf who had never bowed to anyone, pressed his great head against his queen's side and closed his silver eyes in peace. The broken girl had found her throne,